polling data that is going to make you feel great if you are a Kamala Harris supporter. And then I have polling data that is going to make you feel bad if you're a Kamala Harris supporter. So I know.
What?
I'm saying that there is a way to look at polling data. There are many ways, actually, to figure out how dependable it is. We've talked about that for months and months on this show, who's doing it, the methodology, et cetera. But in this case, I think what's going to make you feel good or not so good is where the polling data emerges from. So basically, it's a Sunbelt state issue versus national issue. Let me give you the hopium first, my friends, the hopium that you want. You want to feel good about Kamala Harris. You want to know that the rising despotism that's associated with a Trump presidency, the recrimination, the turning the Justice Department and IRS on his enemies, something that he's already done, the whipping up and fomenting of unrest in America, that's all going to be put off. And Kamala Harris and righteousness is going to rise again in America. I know you want to feel that way. I want to feel that way too. So
The Mark Thompson Show.
Let me share with you then in that spirit, my friends. But right now, here's the hopium. Here's the good news. It comes out and it's brand new. It still has the fresh Kornacki smell on it. Out of NBC. Go ahead, please, if you would.
Yeah, some interesting ingredients that go into what you're seeing here. Harris with a 5-point advantage in our poll nationally over Donald Trump. The big picture, of course, is, look, we've been polling the 2024 race for a while now. This is the first one that NBC has polled with a Harris-Trump matchup. All of the previous polls we did were Biden versus Trump. And going back a year, all of those Biden-Trump polls, 4 of them, Trump had the lead in. 1 of them was tied. So big picture here. This is an illustration of how much the race has sort of transformed over the last 2 months. Now, take a look in terms of what goes into that advantage for Harris in this poll. 1, a gender gap. You're seeing here among men, Trump with an advantage. That's a 12-point advantage for Trump. Among women, 58-37. That is a 21-point advantage for Kamala Harris. What that adds up to is 21 and 12, a total gender gap of 33 points. Now, if anything like that materializes on Election Day, it would just blow away 2020 and 2016, which also had massive gender gaps. This would be significantly bigger than that. That margin among women for Kamala Harris, particularly younger women, an important part of that for her, helping power her in that lead that you see. Then we break it down by race here. Among white voters,
Tony,
9-point advantage.
Right there. A lot of what he's saying, honestly, is it's not that it's irrelevant, it's pertinent, but it may not be determinative. You know what I mean? It may not be the thing that really matters from a bottom line standpoint. But the last thing he just said, I think it could be an element that is more determinative, and that is young women. Young women animated to vote as they were in the midterms and animated to vote in the general. And the question will come down to swing state young women. But the young women totals and the huge disparity that there is with young women between Harris and Trump, that is something hugely, potentially anyway, hugely relevant. Go ahead, Tony.
Women are angry right now. Women are really angry. And also, we don't forget. You see it when you have a fight with one of us, how we'll bring stuff up from, a year ago, 2 years ago. We don't forget. And now we see our sisters in the South dying. Talk about being animated to vote. That'll get you to the polls.
Go ahead, Tony.
For Trump, I think this one is significant. Among black voters in our poll, 85-7 Harris. Remember, a lot of talk when Joe Biden was the candidate, because there were a lot of numbers showing that with Biden as the candidate, Trump was somewhere in the teens among black voters. That doesn't sound like much, but historically, that would be very high for a Republican. And Biden's number among black voters when he was the candidate, you were generally seeing somewhere in the 60s. Even there were some polls in the 50s. It was a big area of slack for Biden when he was the candidate, because this is traditionally a very core Democratic group. In our poll, at least, you see what would be a more sort of traditional number there for the Democrats and for the Republicans. And among Latino voters, Harris with a 19-point advantage. Again, that would be lower for Democrats than they typically get among Latino voters. But again, it is an improvement from where Joe Biden was running. So that helps add up to that lead that you see there for Kamala Harris. Also, take a look at this. The image of Kamala Harris since she became the candidate. This is just asking folks, do you have a positive or negative view? And you can see Harris, 48%. A couple things stand out. She's the only one above water. It's slightly, but higher positive than negative. Everyone, you see this, I should say, Walls is as well here. But Harris, the highest number there at 48% above water. You see Trump at 53. The key, though, is when Harris got in this race just before, we asked the same question about her. Her positive score, this was back in July in our poll, was just 32%. So it's gone from 32 to 48 since she became a candidate. You know, Trump's number more flat. We're kind of used to seeing that for him. So a big jump there for her.
Stop it again,
then
if you would, Tony. I mean, I think
one.
these are drilled down poll suggestions and notations that are important, and here's why. Even though this is a general poll, that is to say, this isn't among swing state voters, and as we know, the way we vote for president in this country is through the Electoral College. So the reason that it still can be instructive is because of trends. We've talked about this before. Trends are so critical in determining outcome, and the trend is immensely positive for Kamala Harris. The trend in terms of likability, the trend in terms of any number of things associated with her personality, the trends are positive. Now, again, not determinative, but the trends are important. Now, the next thing that he's going to get to is concerning. And it's also a function of branding, which we talked about. We talked about it with Brian Tyler Cohen, the fact that the Republicans so effectively brand as the party of fiscal responsibility, et cetera, when the reality is there has not been a GOP presidency. There has not been control of government on the part of the GOP that has reflected any degree of fiscal responsibility. Budgets bloat, government grows, waste, corruption, all grow in those GOP administrations. Again, I know I'm a partisan, but still, the facts are the facts. Go ahead, Tony. Play me a little bit more, if you would. But this speaks to, you'll see, on candidates' attributes, when asked this question, I think it reflects the brand of the GOP and the Dems. Go ahead.
And if you're a Republican and you're looking to take heart in something in this poll, this would be it here. Asking about a number of issues and attributes. The question asked here is which candidate would be better on? And you can see, look, on securing the border, immigration, this rates as a very high concern, voters say in our poll. It's a 21-point advantage for Trump over Harris. Dealing with the economy and inflation, if you combine them, the top issue for voters in our poll. Trump with a 9-point advantage there. You see some Harris advantages here. I just flagged this one because this was, remember, necessary mental and physical health to be president. This is where Trump had that massive advantage over Joe Biden. This was basically reading as a question about age when Biden was the candidate. And that is just completely turned around with Harris as the 20. Democratic candidate.
Yeah. So I think you get the feel for it. And then they continue with different attributes of the candidates. And essentially, you're getting the vibe. Overall, it's a really positive poll for Kamala Harris, as I was saying, and it is a negative trend for Donald Trump. He still seems to score well, again, in this way that I think the GOP candidates tend to score well on things like the economy. The border is always used as a cudgel. It's used as a political football, and there have been no breakthroughs in the border positively. Trump kneecapped the only legislation that actually would have increased Border Patrol agents and actually done the things that the GOP wants to do at the border. It was a GOP-authored bill. And as you know, Trump erased it. because of the political gain that he has been able to achieve through making the border an issue. Women should be very angry, says Mindy Lee. Trump is responsible for women dying. I mean, on the issue of women's reproductive rights, there can be no competition. Karen Cooper, the League of Women Voters, we polled, this is a quote, we polled U.S. Census to get a snapshot of how women are voting. It made one thing clear. The next election is up to women. Women could decide the election. They have to show up in big numbers, and they have to make this issue of their reproductive freedoms, if that's the issue that's bringing them to the polls, they have to make that choice and make it clearly. Now, that is the good news. If you're a Kamala Harris fan, or if you just are a person who might reasonably be frightened of the course that Trump would take this country on, that's the good news. That's a general election poll in which Trump is flagging and Harris is surging, possibly among groups that could be determinative as to the outcome of the next election. But now I must give you the other news, which is not...
What?
I'm sorry. I must. It is... I'm bound as a show host to give you the complete picture. So...
The Mark Thompson Show.
This morning, the latest, and I say this morning, it's only hours old as we come to you live. The latest New York Times Siena College polls of Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina. Again, these are Sunbelt states. And look, if the 2024 presidential election were held today, who would you vote for if the candidates were Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? And in every state, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, Trump leads. And it's not an insubstantial lead. 50% to 45% in Arizona, 49% for Trump to 45% for Harris in Georgia, and 49% for Trump to 47% in North Carolina. Now, what does this mean? It means if those numbers held and Trump held those states, he's almost there. He's almost to the White House. He'd need very little more to get there. It's a good set of numbers for Donald Trump. The northern battleground states, that's still the territory that Harris must concentrate on. But now I turn to the polling decoders of this very poll that they just ran. And at the New York Times, they're saying that the latest Times Siena results on average are 5 points better for Trump than they were when these states were last polled in mid-August. In each state, these results are the best results for Trump from a high-quality poll in weeks. In circumstances like this, our rule of thumb is to toss the results into a polling average, like the New York Times runs a polling average. Of the three states, Georgia is the one where the balance of polling is most clearly favorable to Donald Trump. Kamala Harris hasn't led a poll in Georgia taken in September, and Trump has led in several high-quality polls, like a 3-point lead in a University of Georgia poll that was just held last week. Now, in North Carolina, that's where they say this most recent poll departs from the most recent data. Their poll average, again, this is the New York Times Siena poll, previously gave Harris a narrow lead. She's had strong results from multiple high-quality polls, including the last Times Siena poll, which was in August. This one is very different, obviously, as I've just read to you. So Trump won in 2020, North Carolina, but it's suggested that there might be some inroads for Kamala Harris based also on a lot of the polling that we're seeing. But now this is, if you want to think of it, a reversion to the mean, right? This is kind of the way it was in 2020. Might it be this way as the election draws closer. And then in Arizona, they say this is the murkiest. There hasn't been as much polling of Arizona at all, and there's never been a time when the polls there have strung together a consistent story of who's ahead. And so the last time Siena poll had Harris up 5. That was in August. But now you just saw it. It has Trump up 5. So it's hard to believe that it's really moved that much. So you have to then begin to look at, polling size. For example, in this case, there were 700 respondents to the poll. Okay, so we've talked about this before. You have to, in essentially a way, have to X-ray the X-ray. How did they get this? And there are sampling errors. There can be any number of things that can throw your results by 5 percentage points, or in this case, by 10 percentage points. Anyway, Kamala Harris has led only 2 of the 18 Arizona polls that have been fielded since that time Siena poll. That's from other pollsters, okay? So if you look at trends, it's hard to make a case that Harris is in the lead if she's only led 2 of 18 polls done in Arizona, all right? So the news is mixed. And as I say, the idea somehow that Trump is getting destroyed, he's going to get swept, polling would suggest not necessarily. Let me go back to North Carolina for a second because I want to ask Gary Dietrich about this. You can put before I go back to North Carolina, put the underdog thing back up there because this is interesting and it's quite an extraordinary thing that this is actually not a bad way to evaluate things increasingly. Underdog says, I trust Las Vegas odds more than I do polls. The probability stood at 51% for Harris and 48% for Trump as of 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday. The arbitrage market on betting isn't nothing. I mean, it does move, and we've talked about this. We talked about this last week. The fact that Harris had edged ahead of Trump. There it was, 51-48. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.